The Women's Cannabis Chamber of Commerce brings together leaders from across the sector to explore how women can strengthen and apply leadership skills to achieve success. Over the last several months, we've been talking about what leadership is, how women lead, and what makes a good leader. We have all been in leadership positions, and we have all experienced having our leadership questioned or undermined. How have you handled that? And on the flip side, we have all been part of a team in our careers or in volunteerism where we have been the one questioning the leader. How do you handle being in a situation where the leader has no leadership skills? So I'm going to start with you, Angie.
Okay.
Either
Uh,
question or a
okay.
combination of both.
Yeah, we'll start with the first one. So I ran a team of about 20 bud tenders at the retail level. And as the saying goes, if you got time to lean, you got time to clean. And at the end of the day, we always had, our list of chores that everybody did. There was one woman in particular, I'm going to call her Katie to save her face. And I had found out that she was like actually passing it off every time she was expected to mop. And what kind of made this worse for me is we both went, our alma maters in high school were rivals, even though I'm 25 years her senior, but it's still we kind of poked each other all the time about it. And the fact that she was, mopping was beneath her, it just pissed me off all over again. So I got a hold of her, and the next time she tried to pass it off, I'm like, absolutely not. I'm like, go get the mop, come here. And I'm not even kidding. This lady put 2 inches of water in the bottom of the bucket, like a skit, and like literally kept the mop in the bucket and pushed that shit around the room. I'm like, you've got to quit right now. So I took her in, got the mop set up the way that it should have been. And I said, because, you tried getting away with this, and me being the mother hen that I was at the time, I said, now you get to mop every day for a month. And that's exactly what she did. So yeah, she thought she was putting one past me. And as a mama hen, we will find out sooner or later. And it was the pretentiousness about it that bothered me, like they're all supposed to be on the same page. Nobody likes to mop. Nobody likes to scrub the toilet. Nobody likes to clean up the salt, after the snowstorm. But that's why it was a revolving list. Not everybody always got stuck with the same duty. So that's the way that I had handled that one. And needless to say, she did not quit. And she actually called me recently to endorse her for a job at human resources in the state of Nevada. So I didn't scar her too badly.
So, so we'll go from Angie to an Angela.
Yeah, so I think probably the most common place that I see this is with passive aggressive behavior in general toward either other team members or management or even customers and clients. Um, and kind of what Angie said, those people generally come along with an air of contempt or entitlement. And, you don't, you, they treat, um, they treat your policies as if they're optional and they pass the buck. And if you don't address it really quickly and early, it becomes a culture. It spreads. I think it's contagious. So yeah, I think you got to nip it in the bud quickly when it happens.
Is there a way to prevent that attitude that it's an option? Because whether it's written or not, or required or not, businesses come with SOPs. Everyone has a standard operating procedure, and that how can you so nipping it in the bud? How can you stop that from happening? How can you make it clear it's not an option?
Everybody performs better with clear expectations. So I think when that happens, um, you have to, I think I would address it privately first, before it became a part of the larger team culture. Um, but I think, like Angie said, you've got to sit down and just be very clear in stating, these are your roles and this is the expectation. If you don't meet the expectation, you get written up or whatever the policy is for disciplinary action. I mean, they're basically just not following through on their job. So, and that affects the entire team, whether they're passing the buck or it's something that isn't getting done, it's all affecting the bottom line ultimately. So, yeah, I think the faster you address it and get everybody back, get all your ducks back in a row, the more quickly everything can get back to business.
Well, I'm going to jump back to you, Angie. Because um, with your background, you've worked with a lot of teams. So when this incident came up with that young woman, and I'm sure it wasn't the first time something like that happened, do you, was your thought, this is not going to be a good employee?
No,
Was
because
that a
she was.
flag?
She was, and that was one of the things. I mean, if she sucked on like a bunch of different levels, it would have been a different conversation. But she was really good at her job. She was compassionate. She absolutely knew, the science. People would come just to see her. So I had to make an example out of her. Just like Angela had said, just show the team that yes, management is paying attention, and that we understand that that's wrong because it will affect the entire team if somebody's getting away with something that they don't want to do. It can kind of crumble at, the core of your team. But, I made sure that I made an example out of her in front of everybody. And I think that killed two birds with one stone. Not only did the employee recognize that she couldn't get away with it, but the team also saw that, we weren't just going to let those things slide. Because, we've got these policies for a reason.
So, Liz, what is your take on this? As a leader, how in the past have you dealt with that?
Well, I first off, I think it all starts with when you hire the employee, giving them those clear expectations and that structure, and that's part of their training. If they fall into the category like Angie said, with a great employee, and it's usually the great ones that you have the issues with because they're the ones that feel entitled. I have a following. I sell the most this, so they think they can get away with a little more. And Angie was 100% on track the way she handled it. And yeah, the woman wasn't going to leave. She knew she had it good. Um, but one thing I see, like this generation, yes, there is a lot of entitlement. But I see less of it in the cannabis industry than I do in other industries. But what I do see in the cannabis industry is a lot of job hopping.
Mm-hmm.
People do not stay in one place very long. A year is pretty impressive, but a lot jump from either dispensary or brand and that affects, the bottom line too, so there's a delicate balance there, with what Angie did and, having another good bud tender or brand ambassador that's just going to say, well, I have my following, screw it. I'll just go work it, blah, blah, blah. So you got to be real careful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my take on it.
Okay, so I'm very interested in what you have to say, Holly, about that type of leadership situation, since you have taken on a huge commitment that involves a lot of people, a lot of women. So, and just also with your background, your experience, what's your take on this?
I think Angie was spot on. I'm coming from a military background, over 20 years of being in the military. So I'm very familiar with being the latrine queen, so to say. I've scrubbed many toilets. I've mopped many floors. I've made people mop floors and scrub toilets for many years. And I think Angie was spot on. Of course, every situation is, different. Got to kind of, if you come in too heavy handed on the civilian side, there could be issues. But given the circumstances, whoa for you, Angie. Good job.
And one thing too, you have to know your employees.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really have to know, and before you do any action, you need to weigh the pros and cons of which action is appropriate for that person.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
makes sense.
Yeah, and what they respond to. I wasn't going to scream at Katie because that makes me look like an idiot. It makes the rest of my team, want to tuck tail, which doesn't do me any good. And I didn't want to lose her. I just wanted her to know that she's not special and that she's got to do the same thing as everybody else.
I, however, did a lot of screaming. I didn't call it screaming. It's more like I go toe to toe. I'll walk in. I'll go toe to toe with that person, especially if I'm just taking over as their leader or that group or whatever. I didn't put up with a lot of, because I don't have time to deal with that. So I'm with Angela on that. You've got to nip it in the bud because we have way more important things to be thinking about and talking about than mop the floor.
I also like to start out with something positive.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes a difference, that you acknowledge something positive that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they, suck at everything, which some do. So that's something to take into consideration because that also makes them more receptive to accepting what you're putting out there.
Oh yeah, when it came time to taking care of my people, I took care of my people.
Yeah.
If they went above and beyond and they were giving me 110%, you better believe I'm sitting down and writing a good eval.
Mm-hmm.
You better believe that if we go on an exercise or something and they are doing what's their expectation and giving me more, of course I'm going to write them up for a commendation after that exercise. I took very good care of my people as well. So you have to. You got to keep it balanced, but also got to look at the difference,
right? It made a difference in issues. I'm sure you had a lot less.
Yeah, and once you do that, you kind of clean house, and everybody knows what their expectations are, and they know that you're going to take care of them by doing the right thing. It's a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
Game changer.
I'm going to change the order real quick since we keep losing Judith. So Judith, we can't see you and your mic's muted. Can you jump on real quick? Okay, let's try that again. Come on. Okay. Okay, now we've got two Judiths. That's cool. So, but you're still on mute. Okay, so I'm going to go back to so Judith, when you get your mic going, just, let me know. And then Suzanne, what is your take on leadership when your leadership is being undermined?
I think the biggest thing that a lot of people miss in business is communication. If you communicate clearly what needs to be done, and now you're still going to get those people who think they're special, like Angie says, somebody who thinks that they're maybe better than someone else and they shouldn't have to do the mopping or the toilet cleaning. But if you clearly communicate and they still are giving you attitude, then you address it like Angie did, whether it's privately, which you can start with, and then if it still continues, then maybe you call it out in front of others, or you escalate. You start with the verbal, then you do a written, and every company is different. If you have to take a couple days off to think about whether you still want to be here or not, you can do that as well. Uh, Yelling doesn't generally do anything for anybody except make them shut down. If you whisper or talk softly and calmly, that is when people get nervous, I think, because then they know you're serious. They have to lean in to hear you. I've raised two daughters who would actually come to me sometimes and just ask me, just yell at me, Mom, because they were scared I was calm.
Yeah.
So
I'm the same way.
yes.
Okay, Maria, you have a diverse background in several different industries. What is your take on staff that tries to undermine you as a leader?
So my biggest thing when it comes to management has always been being personable and connection with each team member. It is very time consuming, but I promise you it is so worth it. And so my thing, when I was overseeing 38 retail stores once upon a time, I would make sure to visit everybody. It took me a couple weeks out of the year, but it was worth it. I wanted to know about them, their family, their career objectives. I wanted to know what motivated them, what their goals within the company were, not just letting them be a number of one of 500 people, but I wanted them to know who I am and vice versa. And so I would create a relationship with them to the extent if they did a great job with them with a sales goal, operations goal, whatever it may be, I would make sure I would to email them, give them a shout out, call them, whatever it may be. So one, I think it's creating a relationship with them. Two is getting them buy-in into whatever you're having them do, from mopping floors to implementing a new strategy or goal of whatever the business needs. And I think that makes it a little bit easier, so that when you have to step back in, you're almost like, what's going on? I thought we already went through this. And they kind of have a little bit more respect for you. I feel like, just from my experience, it's kind of like how it happened, because they know who you are, and they know your intentions too. This is a leader that is looking out for me. But when that does happen, I like to be very transparent. I agree with everybody saying about having a soft voice and just being genuine with them. Like, hey, what's going on, right? I hate to assume, because sometimes they might have negotiated with someone else about a job duty or something and they didn't tell me about it. So I would just, ask questions, learn about what happened, and just set expectations and then reinforce that. And they know they don't want to have that conversation with me again. And so I'll keep an eye on it. I don't like to micromanage, but I just will follow up, make sure they're good, make sure they understand. Because sometimes what I've learned is that everybody's learning style is so different. Some people you got to double check, triple check, and some, with one time hearing it, they know exactly what you mean. And so just really understanding that, but really being personable, like really getting to know your team is so important. Yes, it takes so much effort and time. And sometimes you're like, man, I don't have to do this, but really it will go a long way, and will allow you to retain, your people longer, especially in the cannabis industry where everybody's just job hopping. It's one of those things that will have them stay there if they know who you are, especially the higher up you go.
Very good. Yeah, words of wisdom. So, Judith, start talking.
Okay, so my experience is a little bit unique because I've come from more of a corporate structure, and I was inserted into leadership. So I came in with a team that was already there, and they knew more about the role than I did. So, it's one of those things where you're learning from the top and then you're learning from the bottom as well, because you have to learn what they're doing in order to manage what they're doing. And then I had a situation where there was someone who wanted my role but wasn't yet qualified. So when you come into a role like that, there's already some friction because they feel like, they know more than you, especially since they're trying to bring you up to speed with what the normal SOPs are. So that one was a little tough for me. And it was one of my earlier leadership positions when I just became a controller. Um, and so I've learned through that you mentioned something about not wanting to micromanage. But I learned that I don't like to micromanage, but I also don't like to not know what the team is doing, right? In order for you to be able to manage what your team is doing and properly lead them, you do have to know what everyone on your team is doing. So for me, it's going in, learning what's already existing, not trying to fix it yet, right? Because no one wants to hear that their process is broken. So, you go in with how can we improve versus, oh, you all are doing this wrong. And then setting the tone of what my expectations is, and I don't care what you did before me, right? Like this is what it is going now, because once you take on that leadership role, you need to insert your authority over what your expectations is, regardless, because there's always going to be some, well, that's not how we used to do it. um, and just because it's not how you used to do it doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? Also, I find that um, I don't like embarrassing people. I don't like anyone embarrassing me. We're all grown adults, right? So if you don't want to be treated like a child, you shouldn't act like a child. I'm not big on public humiliation, but this is coming from a corporate structure. So my transition into cannabis is, it's not as structured, right? It's a little bit more, I think, we're starting to try to build the foundation to make it a little bit more structured, is what I've seen from myself coming into the space. Um, but I do small build-ups before it get out of control. I learned to nip every little thing, like you said, in the bud. But then, if it like the paper trail for me, it's like, okay, we have this was the warning. Next, after this, it's the performance improvement, right? Like making sure that I have the paper trail to back up that it's not a one-time thing. Like the first time you address it, you don't document it, but you let them know like this is unacceptable. The next time around, it's a formal documentation, and then the next time around is, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, and if I don't see it improving, then we need to fix it, or we need to maybe make a change, whether that's termination or what. But that's been my experience with someone challenging my leadership, and that was a hard one, because someone mentioned, from the beginning, interviewing from the interview process. But when you come into an already built team, um, yeah, that one's tough. That
Yeah.
one's a little bit tough. And then for the second question, how do you handle leadership that's not leading? Um, I've also come from environments like that too. You do what you can, and you also, I hate to manage up, but I've learned to keep a paper trail, especially when someone's not doing what they're supposed to do. It becomes a cover your ass kind of situation, because usually in those predicaments, they like to pass the blame on to um, their subordinates. So always, I always keep a clear paper trail, a follow up email to meetings. If it was a meeting, always send a follow up with what was discussed. Now we have AI, so we could take meeting notes. But always just following up and making sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and also not being afraid to discuss what exactly is my role, right? This is when you go back and you talk about role clarification and what is my responsibility versus what is yours. Because I don't necessarily like to go over anyone's head, but sometimes, it's necessary. If I'm doing your job and my job, maybe I should have your job. Um,
Exactly. Yes, I can't tell you how many times my superior, air quotes, has taken uh, kudos or responsibility or whatever you want to call it for work I've done, and they presented it as their own. I just kind of like, wait, I spent however many hours working on that, and now you're presenting it like it's yours. So,
mhm.
especially if it's someone above you who's not qualified or doesn't know what they're doing, they will have a tendency to take responsibility for all of your work and say it's theirs.
All of your good work, only the good work, though.
Only the good work, yes, yes, Judith, for sure.
So, Maria, how do you have you had that situation, and how do you deal with it if you are not the leader and the leadership is not competent?
That's a really good question, actually. It's a juicy question, but it's a very, very good one. So, the first thing is understanding what are their weaknesses. And if we are working on a project together, I will try to either delegate that weakness that they have, whether it's a presentation or just depending on the project, but and say, oh, I've got someone great on my team that can do that, right? Or taking that off their plate, right? Because I think to some degree, sometimes they are a little insecure or whatever their weakness are, so they kind of know. So I think sometimes they like that. When they don't, though, it is tough. I loved what Judith said about documentation because it can get a little crazy, and documentation will be your best friend just to cover yourself. But I also love what she said about clarification on job responsibilities, who's doing what. But that is a very hard one because, it is a superior, and you want to make sure that they're happy with you and they don't feel some other way. So I would just say communication's key, documentation, and doing your best to support them if you can and if they allow.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to you, Holly. Having the military background and then civilian, so that gives you it gives you two different perspectives. So when in a situation where leadership